There is a mysterious law, deeper than human logic, older than written scripture, and more terrifying than any earthly justice. It is not a law enforced by courtrooms or written in stone. It is written in the psyche of the cosmos, the divine order of things. When someone filled with pride, grandiosity, and the delusion of superiority wounds the innocent, especially one aligned with truth, love, or the journey toward wholeness, something profound stirs beneath the surface of reality. That wound does not disappear into silence. It echoes. A narcissist does not merely injure you externally. They invade your soul with confusion, distortion, and spiritual theft. They project their own darkness into you, and then shame you for holding it. And when you are left trembling in that betrayal, a process begins, not only within you but within the invisible realms. The narcissist believes they've won. They see your collapse as confirmation of their control. But what they do not understand is this. The soul has an immune system. The self, that deep, divine center in each of us, responds not with vengeance in the way humans do, but with correction. The scales will balance, not by your hand, but by an invisible intelligence that restores order. The narcissist's punishment begins where they least expect it, from within. The grand facade they wear, their carefully built illusion, begins to crack. Not through human intervention, but through a pressure they cannot name. Their dreams unravel. Their confidence becomes brittle. Their charm, once magnetic, now repels. Why? Because the divine mirror is turned toward them, and they are forced to see what they truly are. This is the judgment. No man escapes. The encounter with one's shadow. Those who harm the innocent, the empathic, or the spiritually aligned, believe their actions are hidden, justified, even clever. But the soul has a long memory, and what God does more than revenge is initiate a reversal, a sacred inversion of roles. The victim becomes the awakener, the wounded becomes the teacher, and the narcissist, once elevated, begins a descent. A descent into isolation, into confusion, into the very emptiness they inflicted on others. You, however, are not left to decay. While they descend, you rise. Your pain, when embraced, becomes a womb, not a grave. The betrayal breaks your false self, so that the true one can emerge. The spiritual laws always act toward balance. And when the balance is restored, you become the justice they never expected. What God does to the narcissist is this. He lets them taste the hollowness of their own construction. He allows their empire to implode, not always visibly, but existentially. Their victories feel empty, their relationships shallow, their mind restless. They cannot escape the very emptiness they once projected onto you. This is not vengeance, it is alignment. And it is not you who acts. You must only bear the pain with dignity, grieve with truth, and choose not to become what hurt you. Because when the divine restores order, it never misses a detail, and the ones who betray love always fall, not by your hand, but by the weight of their own deception. So rest, stay clean in heart, stay aligned in soul, and trust the deeper law always prevails. There exists within the human soul an invisible scale, a mechanism older than civilization itself, the law of psychic compensation. It is not moral in the way religion teaches, nor vengeful like man-made justice. It simply restores what has been disrupted. When someone disturbs the inner order, when one person exerts power over another through deception, manipulation, or cruelty, that imbalance sets into motion a response not seen with the eyes, but profoundly felt over time, especially when the wound is spiritual, inflicted by a narcissist who believes they are untouchable, above consequence, and immune to correction. The narcissist, in their delusion, cannot comprehend the significance of their actions. To them, others are mere extensions, tools to reflect back their false brilliance. And so when they injure, abandon, humiliate, or emotionally violate someone who offered them authenticity, loyalty, or vulnerability, they do not feel guilt. They feel triumph. But this is where the hidden machinery of the soul begins to move. It is here where God, not as a distant deity, but as the eternal order embedded in existence, responds through the architecture of the psyche. The narcissist thinks in terms of surface, but the divine thinks in terms of depth, and in that depth, compensation begins its quiet work. Though the narcissist may walk away smiling, leaving behind a person shattered and doubting their own worth, it is not the end. It is the beginning of two diverging journeys, one outwardly successful but inwardly collapsing, and one outwardly devastated but inwardly awakening. The narcissist moves forward toward what they perceive as more supply, more admiration, more power. But what they don't realize is that the very energy that allowed them to manipulate, to dominate, has begun to deplete, not through punishment, but through natural withdrawal. What once came easily to them, charm, persuasion, attention, now begins to slip. They try harder, push further, become more aggressive in seeking their fix. But something subtle has shifted. Their soul has started to reject its own falsehood. The mask, once so firmly in place, begins to crack under the weight of its own lie. They may not notice it at first. It's a restlessness, a creeping anxiety that visits at night, a vague emptiness that success no longer soothes, a tightening around the edges of their identity. They begin to feel haunted, not by ghosts, but by their own disconnection. And what is disconnection if not the soul beginning to expose the cost of the illusion? This is the collapse that no one sees, not publicly, but within. The divine does not need to strike them with thunder or destroy their wealth. It is far more precise. It turns their mind against itself. Their victories taste like ash. Their mirror, once a place of vanity, now holds a stare they no longer recognize. Their life may still look impressive on the outside, but inside, the foundation has rotted. The more they seek praise, the more hollow it becomes. The more they chase love, the more repelled others become. The architecture of the psyche, once bent in their favor, now begins to tilt toward truth. And truth is unbearable for the narcissist, not because it punishes, but because it reveals. This is the real consequence of wounding another from a place of superiority, not what God does to the narcissist, but what the narcissist does to themselves in the face of divine alignment. The soul cannot indefinitely carry falseness. Eventually, it demands reconciliation. The higher the tower built on lies, the deeper the fall into the unconscious. And that fall, though denied, resisted, and disguised, is inevitable. The narcissist will feel the collapse, whether they admit it or not. It may show up in addiction, failed relationships, inexplicable depression, or the erosion of their own confidence. But it is not random, it is sacred balance asserting itself. What they inflicted on others is now felt by them, not because you wished it, but because the soul demands it. And you, the one who was hurt, must understand this. Your pain is not ignored. It is not forgotten. It is the catalyst through which a greater justice is already unfolding, silently, deeply, and in ways the narcissist cannot run from. There comes a time in every soul's journey when the illusion must fall away. This is especially true for those who build their identity on deception, control, and the exploitation of others. The narcissist does not seek truth. They seek power through the mask of self. They are not interested in seeing themselves clearly, only in being seen in the way they demand. But there exists in this world a force far beyond human perception, a divine mirror that reflects not the image they try to project, but the truth they refuse to see. This mirror does not arrive with noise. It does not crash into their life with violence. It appears slowly, in subtle moments, a conversation that doesn't go as planned, a relationship that begins to unravel, a reflection in a literal mirror that feels foreign. At first, the narcissist may not understand. They may even feel irritated, confused, as if the world is beginning to betray them. But the betrayal they sense is not external. It is the crumbling of the false self that they built so carefully, now collapsing under the weight of reality. The divine mirror is not a punishment, it is a mercy. But to the narcissist, it feels like torment because it exposes what they have spent their entire lives trying to conceal, their emptiness, their fear, their disconnection from the authentic self. It strips away the accolades, the charm, the manipulations. It holds up the truth and says, "Look, this is who you are when no one is watching." This is what remains when the game ends. This moment, whether gradual or sudden, marks the beginning of an inner confrontation. The narcissist is forced to witness the distortion of their being. They feel misunderstood, isolated, attacked, but in truth they are simply being reflected. What they put out into the world is now returned to them, not by others but by the spiritual architecture that governs human development. The mirror does not lie, nor does it flatter, it reveals, and what it reveals is devastating to the narcissist's constructed identity. Their superiority, once their shield, begins to feel like a prison. Their belief in their specialness now isolates them. Their need to control others exposes their deep sense of inner chaos. They are confronted with the one thing they cannot manipulate, the reality of who they are beneath the facade. This confrontation cannot be avoided forever. It follows them through failed relationships, through loss, through the collapse of admiration they once depended on. It haunts them in moments of silence, and the more they resist, the more it returns. This is not the judgment of a wrathful God, but the process of individuation, the spiritual call toward wholeness that all souls must eventually face. But where others yield to this process and grow, the narcissist often fights it, refusing to admit they are anything less than perfect. This resistance only increases their suffering. In time, the world stops reflecting back what they want to see. Instead, it begins reflecting what they need to see. People become less responsive to their manipulation. Their charm loses power. Even their successes feel shallow. They begin to experience rejection, not because others have changed, but because the soul, their own and the collective, demands authenticity. This is the revenge, if it can be called that, not revenge in the human sense, but the sacred justice of reflection. The narcissist is no longer able to escape themselves. They must look, and what they see is not glorious, not admired, not adored. What they see is the self they tried to bury, insecure, fragmented, aching for love they never truly accepted. The divine mirror has no agenda but truth. It breaks the illusion because illusions cannot sustain the soul. And when the narcissist is left alone with the ruins of their false identity, they may finally have a choice to begin the painful journey toward healing and humility, or to double down, denying the reflection, and suffer the endless torment of living out of alignment with reality. Whatever path they choose, one thing is certain: the mirror will not go away. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. And what it reveals is not only their true self, but the damage they've caused to others along the way. That knowledge, unbearable and relentless, is the beginning of either transformation or self-destruction. But it is no longer yours to carry. The truth has returned to its rightful owner. There is something sacred about the wound inflicted by betrayal, especially when that betrayal comes from someone who wore the mask of love, admiration, or kinship. When a narcissist wounds you, it does not feel like an ordinary break. It is spiritual. It pierces into the deepest parts of your psyche, your identity, your perception of reality, your sense of self-worth. It feels as though your very soul has been hijacked, rewritten, and abandoned. But what often goes unseen in the moment of pain is that this wound, devastating as it is, becomes a portal, a sacred space where cosmic justice begins its silent work. The narcissist believes they have left you broken. In their mind, they have taken something from you, your light, your confidence, your innocence, and walked away untouched. They see your collapse as their victory, but they do not understand the design of suffering, nor the intelligence embedded in pain. What feels like destruction is, in fact, the divine stirring from within. The wound you carry becomes the signal flare that calls upon forces far greater than your abuser could ever comprehend. It is through that pain that justice is summoned, not with swords or thunder, but with transformation. You see, when you are hurt by someone acting from pride, ego, and spiritual blindness, the universe does not remain passive. It responds, but its response is not to strike your enemy on your behalf, not immediately, not always visibly. Instead, it begins with you. The wound, rather than being the end, becomes the starting point of something profound. It is in that sacred wound that your awakening begins, And with your awakening comes a shift in the entire field of energy around the situation. Pain is not random. It is intelligent. It carves you open not to destroy, but to create space. Space for truth, for strength, for vision. When you sit in the aftermath of betrayal, when you are on the floor questioning everything, the divine is closer than ever. It is not comforting you with false promises. It is preparing you for elevation. Because what was done to you did not go unnoticed in the spiritual order, and what the narcissist thought would cripple you becomes your very weapon of liberation. This transformation is not fast, nor is it easy. You will grieve, you will rage, you will question. But as you move through the pain with courage, as you refuse to let it poison you or turn you into a mirror of your abuser, something alchemical happens. You begin to see clearly. You start reclaiming your boundaries. Your intuition sharpens. You rise, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. You become stronger than the person who hurt you ever expected. And with every step you take toward healing, a corresponding shift takes place in the life of the one who wounded you. The narcissist, who once fed off your light, begins to feel a strange void where once there was supply, your energy, your belief in them, your forgiveness. Now there is emptiness. The connection they assumed would always remain begins to dissolve. And with that loss, they begin to feel the absence of power, admiration, control. This is the beginning of their consequence, not because you wished it upon them, but because cosmic balance is always at work. Your sacred wound becomes a silent witness against them. It speaks in realms beyond language. It testifies to what was done, and in doing so, it calls for restoration. Not revenge, but restoration. And that restoration often comes through the collapse of the very illusions they built their identity upon. What they took from you begins to decay in their own hands. Their manipulation, once effortless, becomes clumsy. Their charm, once magnetic, repels. People begin to see through them. Doors close, opportunities vanish, and they do not understand why. But you know why. Because your pain carried power. It was never wasted. It was never invisible. It was a seed planted in the soil of divine order, and from it grew justice, slow, quiet, and unstoppable. So do not curse your wound, honor it. It is the birthplace of your transformation and the silent architect of their reckoning. Your healing is not just survival. It is the echo of a greater justice being written into the fabric of reality. You do not need to seek revenge. You only need to heal. Because when you rise from the wound they gave you, it is not only your life that changes, it is theirs, forever. There is an ancient truth, buried beneath the surface of all great spiritual and psychological traditions. What is done in the dark must eventually face the light. Not because someone demands it, but because the structure of reality itself requires it. No deception lasts forever. No mask can remain glued to the soul indefinitely, and no abuse goes unanswered in the larger rhythm of the universe. There is an archetypal reversal that eventually takes place, a cosmic turning of the wheel, and the one who stood in the position of power, manipulation, and control is eventually brought to confront their own shadow. This reversal is not just poetic justice, it is a spiritual necessity. The oppressor cannot ascend while dragging the weight of their unacknowledged darkness. They may rise temporarily, bolstered by illusion, charisma, or manipulation, but the soul does not tolerate imbalance for long. Eventually, the very traits that lifted them, false confidence, charm without depth, control disguised as love, become the instruments of their downfall. The game turns against them, not because someone played it better, but because the divine order has no tolerance for sustained distortion. For the narcissist, this reversal is unbearable. They are accustomed to winning, to dominating, to bending others to their will. Their identity is built on the illusion of superiority, the assumption that they are beyond consequence. And so, when the wheel turns, they do not merely lose power, they lose the scaffolding of who they believe they are. Life begins to speak back to them in unfamiliar tones. Their strategies, once effective, begin to falter. People stop responding. Relationships disintegrate. They begin to face resistance, not from enemies, but from reality itself. This resistance is the shadow rising, the very part of themselves they have long denied, projected, or disowned. The parts of them that are insecure, fearful, unloved, unworthy, these now begin to surface in unavoidable ways. And they cannot project them onto others anymore because the people around them begin to awaken. The same individuals who once absorbed their venom start refusing to participate in the game. The narcissist is forced to face themselves, and there is no one left to blame. That is the reckoning. In many ways, this reversal is more devastating than any external punishment. It is internal, a psychological collapse. It is the recognition that the world they built was not real. It was sustained by illusion, by borrowed energy, by exploiting others' love and compassion. And once those sources are gone, they are left with themselves, a hollow identity echoing with unfulfilled longings. But the most painful part of this reversal is the confrontation with powerlessness. The very thing the narcissist fears most. For all their need to dominate, their soul has always known how fragile they truly are. And now, stripped of admiration, control, and influence, they meet the truth that they are not godlike, not invincible, not untouchable. They are just a person, and one who has caused harm. The shame that follows this realization, when it is even partly admitted, is suffocating. It's not just guilt for what they've done, it's terror at what they truly are beneath the persona. This is the divine design, the elevation of the humble and the humbling of the elevated. The soul, regardless of the ego's resistance, demands integration. The shadow must be faced. And when the narcissist finally confronts their own shadow, whether through loss, failure, loneliness, or spiritual crisis, they are given a choice. To begin the painful journey toward wholeness, which requires confession, repentance, and humility, or to continue denying it all and slip further into emptiness and fragmentation. Whatever path they choose, the process is irreversible. The reversal has begun. The power they once had over others now turns inward as a force pressing upon their conscience, their peace, their identity. They cannot escape themselves. And in this inescapable confrontation, you are freed. Because you, once the victim, are no longer in orbit around their illusion. You are no longer a mirror for their false self. You are no longer the container for their unacknowledged wounds. As they descend into confrontation with the very parts of themselves they projected onto you, you are released to rise, not in vengeance, but in truth. The oppressor must face the shadow. It is written into the law of being, not because you asked for revenge, but because the soul, theirs and yours, demands balance. And when the oppressor meets their own darkness, not even their pride can save them.